The American studio was quiet and majestic that morning, but beneath that quiet was a flurry of activity, imposing cameras, focused lights, a giant screen bearing the logo of the country's most popular show, Inside the Fire. This political and religious program watched by millions is known for embarrassing its guests, especially Muslims. It is hosted by the famous Jewish American host Richard Nelson, known for his scathing criticism of Islam and his questions that seem intelligent but are in reality loaded with prejudice. That day, the guest was exceptional. A dear old man, with a white beard, of venerable stature, but eyes filled with determination. He was one of the foremost experts on Islamic jurisprudence in the West, a brilliant and humble speaker. Richard began the program as usual with a provocative smile. My guest today represents Islam, the religion followed by more than 1 billion people. My question is simple, but it has been asked over and over for years and I have not found a satisfactory answer. Sheikh Daud, why doesn't God save the people of Gaza? Why doesn't he answer the prayers of starving children, women with their throats cut, and the elderly buried under the rubble? Isn't he all-powerful and merciful? Millions of Muslims pray, fast, and weep, and nothing changes. Where is God? Why doesn't he help them? The studio went silent. Even the technicians behind the scenes stopped moving. Everyone thought that the dear one would hesitate, get angry, or run away from the question. But dear Daud just smiled and answered calmly. Your question, Richard, is profound, but it is based on an incomplete vision. Listen to
me
carefully and I will answer you very clearly. The dear one looked at Richard and then at the camera, and said in a deep, clear voice, your question carries a strong emotional charge, and I understand it. But let's start with the root of the problem. Why are the people of Gaza being tested? Why are they not being helped despite their weakness and their prayers? Quote. Then he placed one hand over the other and continued. First, testing is a divine law. God tests believers to verify their sincerity, just as he tested the prophets before them. Moses was trapped in the sea, Joseph thrown into the well, and Muhammad was driven out of Mecca and starved in the valley. Who said that truth always triumphs immediately? Didn't God say, do you think you'll enter paradise before a calamity similar to the one that struck those before you touches you? Richard leaned forward a little and listened in silence more attentively than usual. The dear friend continued. Second, victory has conditions. Being right is not enough to triumph. Victory requires sincere faith, a single truth, collective righteousness, a return to God, and real effort. God said, if you come to God's aid, he will come to your aid. When we triumph for God in our souls, morals, and societies, he will sustain us in the real world. He raised his index finger and added, thirdly, the delay of victory does not mean his absence, but his wisdom. Sometimes God delays victory to expose hypocrites, to elevate the ranks of believers, to increase community consciousness, and to prepare the ground for an even greater victory. Then the dear man smiled and said, that's why we say that when the answer is delayed, it is not because God is not listening, but because his wisdom is beyond our understanding. Richard asked in a weak voice, and what about prayers? Millions of people pray and nothing happens. The dear one replied, prayer is not neglected, but is fulfilled in 3 ways. Either it is answered as it is, or it is used to ward off a greater evil, or it is preserved for its author in the hereafter. Quote. Then he added, when a child in Gaza weeps and raises his hands to the sky, do not think that God is indifferent. On the contrary, he grants respite to the tyrant. But when he seizes him, he will not be able to escape. Quote, Richard fell completely silent. The program team behind the scenes began to fix the screens, but the dear one was not finished yet. He straightened up in his seat and said, Richard, you see the victory in the fall of the enemy, but for us it is broader. Victory in Islam is not measured by the number of petitions, but by the solidity of the faith, the inflexibility of the soul. For to die standing up, that is the true victory, and not to submit. Quote. Then, in a calmer voice, he added fourthly, purification and sorting. God does not build a nation with indecisive or opportunistic people. He tests the ranks to keep only the sincere, as in the battles of HUD and coalitions. He reveals faces, brings out those who hide hypocrisy and those who have strong convictions. He continued. Fifthly, injustice does not last. All the tyrants of history have fallen. Pharaoh, Nimrod, Hitler, Sharon. The tyrant is left in his tracks, but God does not forget them. Do not think that God is indifferent to what the unjust do. The looks of those present behind the cameras began to change. The sound technician, the lighting technician and the assistant director. Some looked away, others stopped writing. The deer continued. Fifthly, the final victory will be for the people of truth. God's promise never fails, and indeed, God will help those who help him. Victory may be delayed, but it is not measured in days, but in generations. Then he looked directly at the presenter and said, the divine standard is different. You see strength in arms. We see it in faith. You see victory in the media. We see it in perseverance in principles. You see victory in this world. But God sees it more broadly in religion, in the hereafter, in meaning. Richard, usually implacable, began to show signs of nervousness. The deer added, Gaza has won. Yes, Gaza has won because the enemy could not break its determination. Because a child who has lost his parents continues to say, Allah Akbar. Because a mother putting on her linen alone says, we will meet again in paradise. This is a victory that you do not understand. Then he finally concludes the certainty in God's promise. The believer knows that trials are the prelude to victory and that God never fails to keep his promise. All we have to do is be patient, persevere, and work. Richard did not answer or interrupt. He looked down and then back up, tears shining in his eyes. He said in a hoarse voice, I never thought that way. I thought I understood, but now I don't know. Then the tears began to flow and he wiped his eyes in the midst of a solemn silence in the studio. The director shouted in his ear, what's going on? Turn off the live broadcast immediately. But it was too late. Hundreds of thousands of people had seen the clip and social media exploded with the video. A dear Muslim made an American presenter cry live on air. The next day, the video went viral on platforms with the title, When Faith Spoken, and the studio went silent. Days passed after this shocking episode that spread like wildfire. Social media went wild. And global networks replayed the clip multiple times, but one person couldn't bear what had happened, Richard Nelson. Although his tears on the show were genuine and his halting words reflected the truth of the moment, something else inside him was screaming. Richard wasn't ready to be known in the American media as the man a dear Muslim had made cry. He saw his image everywhere, but not as a respected newscaster, but rather as a man defeated by faith. Conservative media mocked him. His opponents called him weak. Even his supporters were divided when he first appeared after the incident. He sat down in front of the camera, but his voice was no longer the emotional one of the man in tears. He returned to his usual tone, his face impassive. He said in a cold voice, "What happened in the previous program was a setup by a clever scholar, using people's emotions to embarrass the truth. Islam is still a religion that requires explanations, and these scholars must confront difficult questions instead of running away from them." Quote. Then he launched a vast media offensive. He wrote articles in major newspapers, published truncated excerpts of the scholar's words, and repeatedly asked to receive the Dear Tao again on various channels, but the latter did not respond. After a week, he published a solitary tweet. Some do not return out of ignorance, but because they know and are afraid of losing their audience. And when asked why he refused to return to the programs, he replied with a calm smile, "When the heart cries and the mind lies, it is not sincere hesitation, but stubbornness. And I will not debate with someone who knows he is lying." Quote. Thus ended the story. But its impact did not fade. All who watched the program understood that truth does not need a loud voice, but a trusting heart and an honest tongue, and that some defeats are never forgotten.